Hey, this is Wes, PC Gamer, and joining me is James from PC Gamer. James, I've dragged you along to talk about Gears Tactics a little bit with me, as well as some XCOM, which is like the natural point of comparison for this game.
Yeah, and you chose correctly, Wes, because these two things intersect perfectly in my interests, so I'm pretty excited.
So big beefy boys and tactical
Tactics,
combat.
baby, you know it. It's a dream come true.
So I got to play I'd say about 3 hours of Gears Tactics a few weeks ago, and captured a bunch of footage, and we're gonna just watch kind of run through a whole mission up until the point where, spoilers, it doesn't go super well for me at the end of this one. This is actually the first mission that I failed, but I think the fail run is actually more entertaining than the doing it right and completing the mission run, because I got a little over aggressive, which made me then try really creatively to get out of the hole that I was in. So we'll see that a bit later. But this kind of first chunk of the game is we're seeing like a short cutscene where you can tell like this game has like a legit, Gears Unreal Engine graphics engine powering it. It doesn't feel like it's just a zoomed out top-down strategy game when you get those cutscenes. And then from there, you get to jump into something that looks a lot like XCOM, but kind of freed from the camera grid and the grid at all. Your characters actually don't move on a grid.
Yeah, it looks firmly in the Gears universe and XCOM universe. But I'm digging this pretty familiar top-down view. Like I feel kind of right at home immediately as a big tactics guy.
Yeah, so in the first few minutes of footage here, you can see probably like a lot of the major things that differentiate this from XCOM, in that your characters are not moving on a grid, and they don't have the same kind of rigid like action move or move action kind of cadence that you have in XCOM. With a basic character in XCOM, if you fire your gun, that's it. Your turn's over, right? And there's some abilities you get later on that can mitigate that or let you fire twice or whatever. But Gears is a lot more freeform from the very beginning, which I actually really enjoyed. I've been playing XCOM 2 after I did this Gears Tactics preview, because I kind of wanted more basis for comparison. And I get really frustrated every time I'm like, I want to shoot this guy and then go move somewhere, that it doesn't let me do that. So that's one of the things I enjoyed in this game right off the bat.
Yeah, and how do you think that like changes up how it articulates it, in a match or excuse me, a given scenario? Does that change the play style and sort of like your decision making overall?
I think it definitely does in ways that are, it probably makes the game a bit easier in that, in XCOM, like you really have to be on the ball with your decisions. You have to really think through the order in which you're taking these actions. And in this game, because you can, for example, have a character just fire 3 times in a row. If you wanted to stand there and just shoot a guy, shoot him again, those are your 3 actions. You have a much wider range of possibilities of how you're going to mix these things up. So it's a little bit less tense when you make a decision. You haven't just like screwed yourself if you do things out of order. You have a little bit more opportunity to fix a mistake like that. But it also means you can kind of sit there and just be like, okay, if I have 4 characters, that's 12 moves I can be making in any order. Like, what should I be doing here? Right. So there's definitely still a lot to think about, even if the game is like a little bit less rigid.
Gotcha. So one big difference I'm noticing here that gets me pretty excited when thinking about the possibilities is this how Overwatch works in Gears Tactics. Can you explain kind of this cone focused Overwatch?
Yeah, it's probably the most obvious difference between the two games. I guess that and the fact that you're not moving on a grid, right? Yeah. So in XCOM, if you put a unit on Overwatch, they're just like looking for any movement within their line of sight, their gun range. And if they see movement, they'll just shoot, right? And in Gears, you choose to put a unit on Overwatch, and then you draw, it gives you like a cone, an aiming cone, which you can see me doing right here. So I'm aiming and saying, if anything moves within this cone, I will fire upon it. So it makes Overwatch a lot more specific, because you're even trying to decide, like, okay, do I want to draw the cone, kind of as far out as my range will allow, which means you're not going to have the same accuracy if you do end up firing on an enemy that like just barely comes into that
narrows
range.
The cone too, yeah.
It also, so you can decide, do I want to be shooting at people where I'm less accurate further away? Do I want to be trying to cover a wider angle here versus covering a very specific angle? And so it makes for some interesting give and take, especially around like an emergence hole, where I'm trying to put Overwatch over this emergence hole, which is one of the ways enemies will spawn in this game, is they'll just kind of pop up right behind your lines or, kind of within your combat area. And you might not be able to cover the whole ring around the emergence hole with the Overwatch. So you're kind of going like, shit, where do I think they're going to pop up out of this hole? And so that's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, it's interesting too because just real quick, you can see the enemies Overwatch too, so they can just lock down specific spaces that you maybe have to then make very obvious like detours around.
Totally. And another big thing about it too is it plays into the action point system. So if you put a unit on Overwatch with your first action, they can actually fire multiple times at the enemy instead of it just being a one and done thing. So there is a difference between choosing to move and then go into Overwatch versus going, okay, I'm going to just sit here in this space and use all my action points to go on Overwatch. So here we're starting to see what happens when you're a little over aggressive with your positioning. I got my guy Sid out there thinking, okay, I'm going to put like a pincher move on these enemies, hit them from both sides, and didn't account for the fact that they were going to pop out of the emergence hole and then immediately get to take their turn. So they basically just got in there and fucked him up with their shotguns immediately. And that really put me on my back foot trying to figure out, okay, how do I get over to this guy and revive him to keep him from dying? And what can I do about these emergence holes? You, just like in regular Gears, you can throw grenades in them. Yeah, so you can stop more enemies from spawning. And if you don't do that, as I will discover a bit later, it can get really bad, right? Just too many enemies for you to be able to contain.
Yeah, that's cool. That's like that Gears experience translated nicely into tactics form.
Yeah, one thing I would say different between this game and XCOM is you generally have cooldowns on abilities instead of just limited resources. I mean, a lot of XCOM abilities have cooldowns, but something like a grenade, right, in XCOM is like a one-time use item, or maybe you get like a couple uses out of it when you do upgrades or whatever. But in this game, mostly stuff is unlimited use, but you're going to have to wait quite a while to be able to use it again. So I just used a heal grenade from my like support character to wake up Sid, which is going to buy him a little life here, but he is still like pretty stuck, pretty tough spot. Yeah. And this is another cool ability for the more like the ranger character, where you can use a dash move to go in a straight line and cover a lot more ground than you normally would. But it has to be in a straight line, so you run into some limitations.
That roadie run.
That roadie run, exactly. It's kind of cool how much of the Gears mechanics they actually translated into a tactics game. The emergence holes, the roadie run. There's a lot of stuff, like all of the finishing moves are a big thing in this game to eliminate enemies. Yeah,
they win you an action point, right? If you kind of take the risk and get up in there.
They do, which is probably my favorite thing in this game, actually, is, it throws a lot of enemies at you. Like you just saw, I just killed four little, I forget what they're called, grunts, wretches, I don't know, four little guys, like with one grenade.
Four little guys.
Yeah, but there's a whole nother like squad of them coming. There's heavier enemies with shotguns and rifles. So it throws a lot of enemies at you. And if you're playing defensively the whole time, it doesn't mean you're going to lose, right? You can certainly play defensively if you want to, but the way the game really encourages you to play is to be aggressive and get execution moves on enemies, because when you do an execution with one unit, the rest of your team get a bonus action point to take. So you really can start stacking up extra actions by having one character kill somebody, get a finishing move, and then have another character do it, and you can just keep winning actions for the rest of your team, including somebody who you've already blown through all 3 actions for, which is really pivotal if you're like, my sniper is the only person who can hit this enemy across the map. Okay, well, if I can kill somebody and get an execution with a different character, then my sniper can take another shot and hit that enemy that was gonna, finish me off next turn or something. So that's when the free form, every character having just a pool of actions gives you even more to think about, because you're like, okay, how can I win yet more actions for this team, and then what order should I be taking all of them in? So.
Yeah, and most of those actions are extremely risky. It's kind of that Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal philosophies of just get in there, because the only thing that will win you back any advantage is ironically, just getting up into kissing distance with your enemy. So.
Exactly. So here we can talk a little bit about some UI stuff. You see the lines with all the characters that shows you who you can hit, which I think is a really nice touch. You can see just at a glance, what enemies you can shoot. You can see if a character has a yellow health bar, that means that they are down and bleeding out. Same for the skull next to an enemy. That means you can execute them. So like right next to Sid, who is executable, and I think on higher difficulties, you'll find that your enemies will actually execute your gears if you let them, be on their knees for too long. But you can do the same to their guys, obviously. So if you don't save somebody within a certain number of turns, they're going to bleed out, and they actually lose a chunk of their health too when they revive. So if you look at Sid's UI here, you can see like 2 kind of X'd out squares on it. And that means when he revives, he's only going to be at half health because he's been downed twice already. Gotcha. So it makes it more likely that they're going to get killed again.
Right. Kind of whittles away at you overall, even if you have things like the health grenades that give you health advantages and revives and such over a long distance. So that's cool. It kind of gets you in and out of the action a lot without just making you 100%.
Yeah, so here I managed to revive him, and I'm about to make, I believe this is when I make a pretty big mistake, or maybe that's next turn. So I've got Sid up, and I'm trying to think, okay, should he use this ability to intimidate all the enemies around him, and that will like set them, it'll break their Overwatch if they're in Overwatch, it'll also like break them out of cover, but it wasn't really useful here because none of them were in cover right now, nobody's doing Overwatch, so I'm kind of trying to figure out like, how can I heal somebody? What's the right move here? And I think I'm about to pull a chainsaw move here, which is actually different than an execution. It's just like a straight up finishing move. But I picked a grenadier enemy, the ones with the shotgun, and they actually have like a close range, like defensive ability, basically, where if you get close to them, they will automatically shotgun you. So I totally wasted that move, and I think I'm about to waste it again with this bayonet charge, thinking it's gonna work. I forget. We'll see what happens here. But there's like all the different characters have pretty cool dynamics. Like I've got this machine gun guy over here, chain gun, who will do some healing based on how long they stay anchored. I think they'll do some healing, and they get like a buff to their damage over time, I believe. So their character is kind of built around pretending like they're a turret, right? And so you're this big guy with this giant gun. The better your positioning, the more points you're going to kind of get in your favor every time you stay in that one spot and keep shooting. So it encourages you to like position them perfectly and then just kind of hold the line with them versus moving them around too much.
Gotcha. Did you get a sense there were, I guess, long-term upgrade paths or kind of stat allocation paths that let you kind of carve out different playstyles within those classes, or are they pretty static?
Definitely. So I would say it's even more varied than XCOM 2 is. So here we got a execution that's going to give everybody on the team a bonus action, which you see in the UI. So that's pretty cool. Nice. And then I tried to use the bayonet charge, thinking it was going to work. and then he gets an attack of opportunity. Down Sid again. So at this point, if I don't revive him, he's going to bleed out this next turn, and I would lose. There's actually, you have like hero characters in this game. So your two like starters are Gabe and Sid, and if either of them die, you fail the mission basically. So this game has kind of a mix of like your XCOM-y, create a character, random squad guys that you just recruit and can customize, and then your more heroic characters. And they actually have some special abilities too that not everybody has. So it's kind of fun, it's like you get a little aspect of that hero shooter kind of design in here, but for the most part your squad are just disposable grunts that you can customize.
Okay, interesting.
So yeah, let me talk about the skill system a little bit. In XCOM, you have each character has like 2 options every time they level up, whether you want to, your sharpshooter can kind of lean into their sniper rifle or they can lean into their pistol. In this game, you have like 4, there's kind of 2, there's a 2-sided skill tree, and we can show a little bit of this. The skill tree on the left will go up and down into 2 separate paths, and then on the right, up and down into 2 separate paths. So you can basically have 4 different specializations for each class, and those specializations you can also kind of mix and match, right? So you're not going to be able to fill out the entire tree with a character before they hit max level, but you could pull, a few abilities from the left side that might, make your ranger character, for example. You can pick some characters that make them able to move further in one turn than a normal character would, and then you can kind of go on the other side and pull up some skills that make them do more damage in combat or something like that. Gotcha. So there's a decent amount of mixture there. I think you'll actually end up with characters who are a little bit more customized than you would in XCOM in terms of which skills you pick to make kind of amalgamate your own version of a class.
Right. You're not sitting pretty here, Wes.
No, it's going pretty rough.
Something I'm noting here is that, like, and I'm wondering if you felt this, that the enemies are just pouring in. Like, XCOM would kind of surprise you and ambush you from all sides, but this seems to be about, like, kind of an onslaught from all angles. And a lot of these systems, skill systems and character abilities seem built to support pivoting hard. Did you kind of get a sense that is sort of part of the design?
Yeah, and talking to the developers, like, they were definitely about putting more enemies on screen. And I think the enemies are generally not as hardy as enemies in XCOM could be, but there are a lot of them for sure. And it makes you strategically think about, like, am I going to close this emergence hole? So one of the problems that I ran into on this mission was I kind of blew through my grenades too early, and then they were on very long cooldowns. And because I kept trying to revive this character too, I didn't get a good chance to close this other emergence hole. And so that adds, more characters coming out than I might otherwise be having to fight. So you definitely need to be careful about some of those abilities as much as it pushes you to be aggressive. If you throw all your grenades and then an emergency hole pops up, like you just got to figure out how to deal with it, So yeah, there's a lot of enemies closing in. And I was really I was just kind of on my back foot at this point, trying to figure out, how do I kill these guys? How do I keep this one character from getting downed again, get him to safety? A lot of my abilities were on cooldown. So I was definitely panicking a little bit.
That's good though. It's like prying yourself out of these corners you accidentally paint yourself into is part of the charm of these games. And, you get close at times, and it shows that it is possible for you to get out. Had you known a couple more things.
Yeah. So here I was trying. I was hoping that this plant a grenade ability would work as closing an emergence hole. It does not. You have to throw the grenade into the hole. So I was just kind of placing it like a claymore. So that's not gonna do it for me. Gosh. But. We saw a second ago too the enemy being on Overwatch, and I actually ran my character just out of that Overwatch to get him to cover. But one other cool, I guess you'd call it an ability they put in this game, is you have a thing called I think disrupting shot, something like that, which you can use to knock enemies out of Overwatch. So you can shoot them with your pistol with that move, and then that'll knock them out of Overwatch, and then you can run through where that line of sight would have been. So, in XCOM you can just injure an enemy to disrupt Overwatch or something like that. But I thought it was pretty cool that they had like that there was a feature that they consciously built in here, and as a result you'll see enemies use Overwatch a lot, and it's a big factor of the game's figuring out how you disrupt that so that you can move safely.
That's rad. Did you get a sense that there's because from what I can tell, this is more of a bespoke campaign. Are there any like randomized elements when it comes to level generation or like familiar metagame stuff between missions?
Great question. So it doesn't really have the metagame stuff that XCOM does in terms of building out your base. You're gonna pick up items that you use to customize your character's weapons. So there's a lot of there are a lot of different parts of the weapons that you can change out. Like barrels and sights and handle, grips and clips and all that stuff. So that's how you'll be customizing your characters mainly. There is some other aesthetic customization, but you're not going to have the same like detailed armor system and like doing all the research and stuff that you will in XCOM. It's definitely more focused and straightforward, but it will have some degree of those like random levels to go on. So it's very much a narrative campaign. There's cutscenes, before and after every single level, but kind of when you get closer to the end of an act, you'll have choices of like side missions to go on, and you'll have to complete like a set number, maybe 5 or something side missions before you go to the big boss fight at the end of the act. And a boss fight is actually one of the big differences between this and regular XCOM. So you will get some of those kind of non-narrative driven side stories that you can go on to just like level up your characters. So and that's the end of Sid there. Somebody came out of the emergence hole. I had kind of made a gamble with that grenade, putting it on one side, hoping maybe they'll spawn there and it'll take them out. Did not take them out, so I had to re-roll the mission. But we'll save that for another time. That'll do us, I think, for this one. Any closing questions though you have for this in XCOM?
No major questions. I'm just I guess. Do you think this is something a bit more accessible to tactics people than something like XCOM, without necessarily being less challenging?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, XCOM has a lot of systems that it throws at you, especially if you're playing like XCOM 2 War of the Chosen, which adds all these other elements which are really cool, but it's just a lot, right? This game, you're going to get to do some of the fun character customization stuff, but for the most part, you're just going to be in the strategy mode and just doing missions. So I think it's a lot, if you feel like you want to play XCOM, but you don't want the overhead of like, I have to understand the world map and I have to like balance the timing of when I go on these missions before, otherwise they're going to like invade me and, complete the Dark Project or whatever. You don't really have to worry about that stuff in this game. So if you want that grand strategy feeling, this might feel a little bit too stripped down for you. But if you really are just into the tactical combat, like I think Gears Tactics is going to be really fun.
Wow, looks pretty neat.
Cool, so that'll do us for this convo. You can also check out a preview I wrote on the website, talking to the developers about making this a very PC-focused game. They're doing a lot of the same technology stuff that's in Gears 5, really, in terms of graphic settings, a lot of accessibility options that are pretty cool. And it's like Gears Tactics is out on April 28th, so we'll be able to play it in a month.
Took you out.
I've dabbled in tactics games, and as a major Gears fan, I was keenly interested in checking out Gears Tactics. I went hands-on with the turn-based tactics game for about 3 hours, and if the laptop I was playing on wasn't taken away from me, I'd probably still be playing. Gears Tactics is shaping up to be an engaging new way to play in the Gears universe.
Heads up, we're coming!
Gears Tactics follows 3 new characters in events that happened 12 years prior to the start of Marcus Phoenix's story. It's hard to say how important these characters will feel against the mainline Gears stars, but with the Gears Tactics protagonist's last name being Diaz, there's exciting potential for us to see him tied to Gears 5's Kate. His story starts with him defending a motor pool before he's quickly forced into finding allies to take on a menacing Locust mastermind who's creating monstrosities that are causing quite the mess of chaos for the COG. Gears Tactics' gameplay is not simple, and that's just the way I like it. There are a lot of systems at play that are understandable for sure, but even in the first few missions, I knew that tactics in Gears Tactics' name wasn't just for show. I was pleased with how much I felt like I needed to learn strategically when I first jumped in. Gears Tactics unsurprisingly shares a lot with XCOM. Each unit gets a set number of actions per turn. Every character is assigned a class with its own set of abilities with cooldowns, there are lots of weapon and skill upgrades, and plenty of stressful situations where a single hit chance can make or break an entire strategy. Gears Tactics shares other important mechanics and abilities with XCOM 2, some of which are a perfect fit for a Gears game. The shield icon showing cover and eye icon that showed whether or not my character was in enemy sights were hugely helpful, especially when it came to playing against an important ability, Overwatch. This ability allows units to monitor an area and shoot anything that comes in range so long as there are still bullets in their gun. There are tools to stagger enemies out of Overwatch, but since those tools also go on cooldown, I was usually forced to get creative, or counter their Overwatch with 1 or 2 of my own. But for all the XCOM in Gears Tactics, it's certainly not just a Gears-themed reskin. For one thing, Gears Tactics moves faster with each unit having 3 action points per move instead of 2. This was a noticeable difference. There's also no grid system for movement, which felt right for a Gears game. Another big difference from the unrepentantly lethal XCOM games is that whenever an enemy takes enough damage, they'll fall to the ground and stay in a down state. This opens the opportunity for any one of your characters within range to perform a glorious execution kill, which gives every ally an additional action point regardless of whether or not they had spent any during the turn, effectively turning bad guys into power-ups. Emergence holes are another familiar gameplay mechanic in Gears that made it into Gears Tactics. Closing it with a grenade is business as usual, but taking out the numerous enemies that can spawn from it is a different matter entirely. For instance, several fast wretches can make a fight against the larger drone enemies exponentially more difficult if you don't have a character with a lot of ammo who can easily deal with them. And if you fail to close the emergence hole, more locusts can spawn. After I got to a certain point in the campaign, I jumped ahead to a big boss fight that I was not quite prepared for. Before the fight began, I took a peek at higher level characters with mods and other customizations unlocked. The character builds seemed to scale well in complexity and certainly helped to define character roles. For instance, as a Vanguard, Sid's Retro Lancer was decked out with mods that increased his critical damage and base damage. Then, on to the boss. Much like mainline Gears games, special equipment allowed me to deal heavy damage to the massive Corpser boss I was pit against, but that equipment, new enemies I was unfamiliar with, and the boss also did some heavy damage to my team. When my units inevitably dropped, they go down before actually dying just like Locust, I was able to pick them up but at a cost. If your character goes down, they lose a chunk of their health for the remaining battle. This felt like a fair way to let me keep playing with appropriate punishment for my mistakes. If one of the protagonists is killed in a mission though, you'll have to start over. The randomly generated recruited characters are less lucky and are gone for good if they die. I wasn't able to defeat the Corpser in the end, but I'm confident I'll have a solid strategy for the next time we meet when Gears Tactics is out on April 28th. For more on Gears Tactics, be sure to check out the announcement trailer, and for everything else, keep it on IGN.
Not yours.
Gears Tactics knows that I could just sit behind cover, Overwatch activated, waiting for the Locust troops to stumble into my line of fire. I mean, patience is a virtue, right? Well, the problem with that saying is it doesn't really account for sawing a bad guy in half with a chainsaw gun. I'm Wes, PC Gamer, and I recently got to play a few hours of Gears Tactics, which is a lot like XCOM, but with a very Gears of War twist put on it. Even in the context of an XCOM-inspired strategy game, chainsawing bad guys in a shower of ludicrous gore is still pretty great. Gears' defining executions are really key to its new tactical combat, even though it's not a shooter anymore, and they push you to be aggressive in the face of enemy hordes. So after mortally wounding an enemy, you can get up close and execute them with a pistol smash to the head, or cut them in half with a chainsaw, and that ultra-violence really psychs up the rest of your squad, and that actually gives them an extra action point. I think it's a cool way for them to translate mechanics from the shooter series into a tactics game, and it also really fits the more aggressive nature of Gears as opposed to something like XCOM, which is obviously much more reserved.
Not yours.
The first hour of Gears Tactics, I mainly would pop a soldier out of cover just for an execution when it felt safe, and that extra action point felt like a nice bonus. But, you know, it's already a faster-paced strategy game than XCOM. Instead of just being able to move and take an action on your turn, you actually just get 3 action points in Gears Tactics that you can spend as you choose. So you can even have an enemy, you can even shoot an enemy 3 times with one single soldier if you want to. It'll totally let you do that. So instead of staying put and just firing 3 times, you know, a lot of times I would try to move my units around, position them a little bit, get an execution occasionally, but I quickly realized I was going to have to do it a lot more because this game throws a lot of enemies at you. I started having to deal with emergence holes where they would barf up piles of enemies, and those guys would just jump straight behind my cover and flank me. So I realized that 3 action points wasn't going to be enough. I was going to have to start chaining these executions to really stay in business. Like other great strategy mechanics, these execution chains really trigger that part of your brain that loves to optimize. It reminded me of starting every round of a game of Into the Breach thinking, like, how can I possibly get out of this? And finding that one perfect solution. So in one fight, I accidentally got one of my gears surrounded by enemies, and it took most of my actions just to thin the herd and be able to revive him. And then once he was on his feet, he was able to execute a nearby grunt, which turned out to be really clutch because I immediately got him downed again by trying to bayonet a grenadier enemy, and they have a counter move where if you get too close to him, shotgun you in the face. So without the bonus action that he granted to the rest of my squad, nobody would have been around to resurrect him a second time. It's a really clever idea that makes Gears Tactics, again, feel more like actual Gears of War than I expected.
Gonna need to commandeer this whole platoon for our little grub hunt. That won't go down easy.
Don't you worry. Been working on my recruiting pitch.
Yeah. That's what I'm afraid of.
So thankfully I never felt like I was just playing XCOM with a Gears skin. Gears Tactics does away with a lot of XCOM's high-level complexity, like the base building, the resource management stuff, all of that kind of meta campaign, to focus more on a narrative campaign and a cool equipment upgrade system. So every mission in this game is going to start with a cutscene, it's going to end with a cutscene, it has several acts, and each act culminates in a big boss fight. I think that stuff's all really cool, but it still has some of the most important pieces of XCOM, I feel, which is you can recruit, kind of random units, so you get to customize your squad as you see fit. And before you complete each act, there will be a series of kind of side quests you can go on to help level up some of those troops, you know, train up some rookies if some of your higher end soldiers get killed off, that kind of thing. Your weapons can be upgraded to hold more rounds, improve their accuracy, crit damage, and so on. That's kind of your upgrade system in this game instead of the research from XCOM. And the parts for those gun upgrades that you're going to do can be found scattered around mission maps. So sometimes you'll have, you know, some risk reward of do you want to stick your neck out to go pick up a nice upgrade. But you'll also earn them just from completing missions and from completing bonus objectives, like killing 8 enemies in one turn, for example.
Should be useful.
There are 5 classes: Support, Vanguard, Heavy, Scout, and Sniper. and they each have kind of an open-ended skill tree with 4 specialties. You'll only be able to max out about 2 of those paths for any one soldier if you manage to keep them alive to max level. So with my scout, I was already eyeballing skills from 2 separate trees that would work well together. For example, one of them gave her a dash ability to move extra far in a straight line, while another gave me a free action point when using her cloak ability to briefly turn invisible. In the end, I really liked the balance that Gears Tactics strike. I played through most of the first act of the game, got to play a big boss fight, and, you know, overall, it's not as overwhelming as XCOM 2. It lacks some of that sandbox potential. It's not a game that you're going to get lost in for hundreds of hours, potentially. But instead, it has cutscenes, really nice presentation, big set-piece boss battles. There's no grid, so movement and that kind of stuff feels a little different. And, of course, it's got chainsaw guns. So, in my opinion, that's all you need.